ね。
あれもっと高いあれ
あら。
やばいよ。
これも大丈夫っすよ。
いやここもやばいよ。やばい。やばい。
The delirious victim staggers about in his final moments. His speech is slurred, skin purple-black covered with swollen, pus-filled lumps as death calls him. Witnesses to this terrifying spectacle called it the dance macabre, or dance of death. In the 14th century, a terrible catastrophe fell upon Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa that would change the course of history. The Black Death. The Black Death, or bubonic plague, was an outbreak of disease that killed 1/3 of the European population in the period 1347 to 1350. It had a similarly devastating impact in Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa. The disease played no favorites. Rich and poor, young and old, priest and peasant, all fell victim to this horrible and, at the time, unexplained sickness, which was spreading like wildfire.
The United States' answer to what Adlai Stevenson termed Soviet blackmail in Cuba was a quarantine of all offensive weapons being shipped from Russia to that island fortress. The U.S. threw up a steel fence, prepared to stop any vessel carrying materials of war. In Cuba itself, 100,000 men were put under emergency orders as they had been during past invasion scares. The waterfront in Havana and along other parts of the coast bristled with gun emplacements as the Cuban regime waited to see what their bosses in the Kremlin were to do. Cuba became the focus of world attention. Here centered the most critical threat of global war since the surrender of Germany 17 years ago. Castro has put every able-bodied man through military training. He has even armed some as young as 12 years of age, and authorities assembled thousands in cities and villages for patriotic rallies. As in the past, these rallies are designed to whip up hate of what Castro calls Yankee imperialistic warmongers.
One of the worst natural disasters in recorded history was caused by a virus. The influenza pandemic of 1918 struck every major U.S. city, dropping people where they stood.
There were at least 20 million people killed worldwide, and it's probably the worst pandemic the world has ever known. There were more people killed from influenza than there were from the First World War.
The war itself was the problem. If there had been no war, that year's strain would have stayed isolated. But when Allied troops met in northern France to exchange fire with the enemy, they also exchanged a lethal strain of flu. So it began.
For decades, men in bunkers watched their screens and warning lights every hour of every day, waiting for the Cold War to go nuclear. So too was the situation just after midnight on September the 26th, 1983. Stanislav Petrov was the lieutenant colonel in charge of the Soviet Union's early warning radar system in a bunker near Moscow. Then, it happened.
When I first saw the alert message, I got up from my chair. All my subordinates were confused. So I started shouting orders at them to avoid panic. I knew my decision would have a lot of consequences.
The radar was showing a single missile inbound from the United States. Now the race was on. Was it real or a computer error? His boss accepted over the phone it was a likely fault. But as soon as he hung up,
the siren went off for a second time. Giant blood-red letters appeared on our main screen, saying start. It said that 4 more missiles had been launched.
10,000 years ago, a deadly virus arose in northeastern Africa. The virus spread through the air, attacking the skin cells, bone marrow, spleen, and lymph nodes of its victims. The unlucky infected developed fevers, vomiting, and rashes. 30% of infected people died during the second week of infection. Survivors bore scars and scabs for the rest of their lives. Smallpox had arrived. In 1350 BC, the first smallpox epidemics hit during the Egypt-Hittite War. Egyptian prisoners spread smallpox to the Hittites, which killed their king and devastated his civilization. Insidiously, smallpox made its way around the world via Egyptian merchants, then through the Arab world with the Crusades, and all the way to the Americas with the Spanish and Portuguese conquests. Since then, it has killed billions of people, with an estimated 300 to 500 million people killed in the 20th century alone.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened. The Soviet version is this. One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged, and there is speculation in Moscow that people were injured and may have died. The Soviets may have been fairly quick to acknowledge the accident because evidence in the form of mild nuclear radiation had already reached beyond the Soviet borders to Scandinavia. We begin with ABC's Dean Reynolds.
The first word that something was seriously wrong came from this power plant in eastern Sweden, where workers coming on the job registered abnormally high levels of radiation on their bodies. Although the levels were not high enough to harm humans and no accident had occurred at that plant, it was shut down. And as tests were conducted, similar puzzling reports of high radiation came in from all over Scandinavia. But still, no accidents were reported, leading to the conclusion that the problem was elsewhere, to the east, in the Soviet Union. A fact confirmed to the Soviet people on television tonight.